In architecture, the capital forms the topmost member of a column. It mediates between the column and the load thrusting down upon it, broadening the area of the column's supporting surface. The capital may be convex, as in the Doric order, concave, as in the inverted bell of the Corinthian order, or scrolling out, as in the Ionic order. These form the three principal types on which all capitals are based. The Composite order, established in the 16th century on a hint from the Arch of Titus, adds Ionic volutes to Corinthian acanthus leaves. From the highly visible position it occupies in all colonnaded monumental buildings, the capital is often selected for ornamentation, and is often the clearest indicator of the architectural order. The treatment of its detail may be an indication of the building state. Pre-classical capitals. The two earliest Egyptian capitals of importance are those based on the lotus and papyrus plants respectively, and these, with the palm tree capital, were the chief types employed by the Egyptians, until under the Ptolemies in the 3rd to 1st centuries BC. Various other river plants were also employed, and the conventional lotus capital went through various modifications. Some kind of volute capital is shown in the Assyrian bas-reliefs, but no Assyrian capital has ever been found. The enriched bases exhibited in the British Museum were initially misinterpreted as capitals. In the Achaemenid Persian capital, the brackets are carved with either a heavily decorated lion, griffin or bull projecting right and left to support the architrave. On their backs they carry other brackets at right angles to support the cross. Timbers. The decoration underneath the bracket capital comes from art and designs from the many cultures that the Persian Empire conquered and assimilated, including Egypt, Babylon, and Lydia. But of course these decorations below the bracket capital serve no architectural purpose and are simply there for show. The earliest Aegean capital is that shown in the frescoes at Knossos in Crete. It was of the convex type, probably molded in stucco. Capitals of the second, concave type, include the richly carved examples of the columns flanking the tomb of Agamemnon in Mycenae. They are carved with a chevron device, and with a concave apophage on which the buds of some flowers are sculpted. Classical capitals. The Doric capital is the simplest of the 5 classical orders. It consists of the abacus above an ovolo moulding, with an astragal collar set below. In the Temple of Apollo, Syracuse, the echinus moulding has become a more definite form. This in the Parthenon reaches its culmination, where the convexity is at the top and bottom with a delicate uniting curve. The sloping side of the echinus becomes flatter in the later examples, and in the Colosseum at Rome forms a quarter round. In the Ionic capital, spirally coiled volutes are inserted between the abacus and the ovolo. In the Ionic capitals of the archaic Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, the width of the abacus is twice that of its depth. Consequently, the earliest Ionic capital known was virtually a bracket capital. A century later, in the temple on the Ilissus, the abacus has become square. It has been suggested that the foliage of the Greek Corinthian capital was based on the acanthus spinosus, that of the Roman on the acanthus mollis. Not all architectural foliage is as realistic as Isaac Ware's, however. The leaves are generally carved in 2 ranks, or bands, like one leafy cup set within another. One of the most beautiful Corinthian capitals is that from the Tholos of Epidaurus. It illustrates the transition between the earlier Greek capital, as at Bassae, and the Roman version that Renaissance and modern architects inherited and refined. In Roman architectural practice, capitals are briefly treated in their proper context among the detailing proper to each of the orders. In the only complete architectural textbook to have survived from classical times, the 10 books on architecture, by Marcus Vitruvius Pollio, better known just as Vitruvius, dedicated to the Emperor Augustus. The various orders are discussed in Vitruvius' books I and IV. Vitruvius describes Roman practice in a practical fashion. He gives some tales about the invention of each of the orders, but he does not give a hard and fast set of canonical rules for the execution of capitals. Two further, specifically Roman orders of architecture have their characteristic capitals, the sturdy and primitive Tuscan capitals, typically used in military buildings, similar to Greek Doric, but with fewer small mouldings in its profile, and the invented composite capitals, not even mentioned by Vitruvius, which combined Ionic volutes and Corinthian acanthus capitals in an order that was otherwise quite similar in proportions to the Corinthian, itself an order that Romans employed much more often than Greeks. The increasing adoption of composite capitals signaled a trend towards freer, more inventive capitals in late antiquity. Indo-Corinthian capitals. Indo-Corinthian capitals are capitals crowning columns or pilasters, which can be found in the northwestern Indian subcontinent, and are usually combine Hellenistic and Indian elements. These capitals are typically dated to the 1st century BC, and constitute important elements of Greco-Buddhist art. The classical design was often adapted, usually taking a more elongated form, and sometimes being combined with scrolls, generally within the context of Buddhist stupa and temples. Indo-Corinthian capitals also incorporated figures of the Buddha or Bodhisattvas, usually as central figures surrounded by, and often under the shade of, the luxurious foliage of Corinthian designs. Post-classical European capitals. Eastern capitals. Eastern Romanesque or Byzantine capitals are of endless variety. The classical Roman composite capital would seem to have been the favorite type they followed at first. Subsequently the block of stone was left rough as it came from the quarry, and the sculptor evolved new designs to his own fancy, so that one rarely meets with many repetitions of the same design. One of the most remarkable designs features leaves carved as if blown by the wind, the finest example being at the 8th century Hagia Sophia. Those in the Cathedral of St. Mark, Venice, specially attracted John Ruskin's fancy. Others appear in Santa Apollinare in Classe, Ravenna. The capital in San Vitale, Ravenna shows above it the dosseret required to carry the arch, the springing of which was much wider than the abacus of the capital. On Eastern capitals the eagle, the lion and the lamb are occasionally carved, but treated conventionally. Western Romanesque and Gothic capitals. In Romanesque architecture and Gothic architecture, capitals throughout Western Europe present as much variety as in the East, and for the same reason, that the sculptor evolved his design in accordance with the block he was carving. But in the West variety goes further, because of the clustering of columns and piers. The earliest type of capital in Lombardy and Germany is known as the cushion cap, in which the lower portion of the cube block has been cut away to meet the circular shaft. These types were generally painted at first with geometrical designs, afterwards carved. The finest carving comes from France, especially from the area around Paris. The most varied were carved in 1130 to 1170. These have been copiously illustrated in 5 volumes in the Ark of God by historian John James. In Britain and France, the figures introduced into the capitals are sometimes full of character. These capitals, however, are not equal to those of the early English period, in which foliage is treated as if copied from metalwork, and is of infinite variety, being found in small village churches as well as in cathedrals. Renaissance and post-Renaissance capitals. In the Renaissance period the feature became of the greatest importance and its variety almost as great as in the Romanesque and Gothic styles. The flat pilaster, which was employed extensively in this period, called for a plainer rendition of the capital, executed in high relief. This affected the designs of capitals. A traditional 15th century variant of the composite capital turns the volutes inwards above stiffened leaf carving. In new Renaissance combinations in capital designs, most of the ornament can be traced to classical Roman sources. The Renaissance was as much a reinterpretation as a revival of classical norms. For example, the volutes of ancient Greek and Roman Ionic capitals had lain in the same plane as the architrave above them. This had created an awkward transition at the corner, where, for example, the designer of the Temple of Athena Nike on the Acropolis in Athens had brought the outside volute of the end capitals forward at a 45-degree angle. This problem was more satisfactorily solved by the 16th-century architect Sebastiano Serlio, who angled outwards all volutes of his Ionic capitals. Since then, use of antique Ionic capitals, instead of Serlio's version, has lent an archaic air to the entire context, as in Greek Revival. Within the bounds of decorum, a certain amount of inventive play has always been acceptable within the classical tradition. When Benjamin Latrobe redesigned the Senate vestibule in the United States Capitol in 1807, he introduced 6 columns that he Americanized, with ears of corn substituting for the European acanthus leaves. As Latrobe reported to Thomas Jefferson in August 1809, these capitals during the summer session obtained me more applause from members of Congress than all the works of magnitude or difficulty that surround them.